When politicians can't talk anymore, when musicians can go in, and I really believe we can create good karma, good connections between people. Hello, I'm Stephen Huff, and this is Living the Creative Life.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for being here. Again, 12 years later. It's still like 12 years later.
I think you get to a certain age when you don't care so much what people think about you. And that's one of the great things about getting older. When you're 20, it matters an awful lot what people think. But then, gradually, maybe those things matter less.
It's a delight to welcome you back.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
Now this show has a different name, Living the Creative Life, and now it's Sir Stephen Huff. How would you say that the time that's elapsed since then has shaped you as a person, and how your impressions of life have evolved?
My goodness, a huge question. Well, it's the old thing, isn't it? That it seems like much longer and it seems like much shorter. I can't believe that 12 years ago, how many concerts is that? I mean, about 100 a year, so that's I couldn't tell you where I've played or what I've done, what repertoire I've done. But I suppose the writing stuff is the thing that would come to mind, because since we had our last talk, I've written and published a novel and 2 other books. One about music mainly, and the other an autobiography of my early years. And I've written a lot of music in that time too.
Looking at the fact that we've mentioned about 100 concerts a year on average, the spacing and the pacing of that's one concert every 3 or 4 days. If we're balancing all the different creative pursuits that you have been incorporating, the writing, the composition, how do you find time for all of that?
Well, there's a lot of dead time in a life of a traveling pianist. You know that, yes, that's every night, but on stage, if it's with an orchestra, it's an average of 30 minutes. You know, some concertos, of course, are 50, some are 20. So there's a lot of time outside of that. Time traveling, time on planes, time waiting at airport gates for cancelled flights, time in hotels, you know, those endless nights. You have a rehearsal at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're finished at 4, and then what? Until midnight. Dinner, yes. Seeing friends, if you know people in the area, yes. Practicing, yes. But then there's a lot of time, and I've tried to use that time to do other things. I never watch TV in hotel rooms. I can't remember the last time I switched it on. When I'm writing a piece, it goes through many stages. There's the sort of instant moment the first moment rather, when I get the idea. So someone says, I'd love a piece, as they did recently, for flute and piano. So I start thinking and I get an idea. And then once the idea is born, it probably takes 6 months at minimum to bring it to birth. It's conceived, it actually happens, and then it develops. And so a lot of the time of the development can happen when I'm walking around. You know, I don't need to be at a desk, at a piano. The ideas, especially structural things, architectural things, how the shape of a piece goes, which is so important. And where is the climax? You know, is it too early, or could it be stretched out? Is it long enough? So all of that is stuff that can be done in the middle of a busy life playing concerts. And actually, sometimes I think it's good because it takes my mind off, you know, the fingers on the keys. I'm actually able to be less nervous because I'm not sort of thinking about that all of the time.
Would you say that there's a role in the subconscious for your creative process? You mentioned walking around. Do you try to have an idea occur to you, or do you feel like this comes out of the ether?
Well, it's both. I think definitely there's an awful lot of subconscious about it. I don't even know where certain things come from. I mean, I write a piece and I'm very conscious of having spent a year working on, like, my string quartet. And then it's been a couple of years since I wrote that piece, and I've heard the Takash Quartet played a number of times when we've toured. And I'm listening to it, and I don't really know where I got that idea from. And well, why did I do that with it? And it sometimes I think, well, it could have done something better, that seems better than I remember, or it's a very strange process. I think if I just were a composer sitting at home, I'd probably be blocked all the time because I'd be sitting there thinking, okay, what am I going to write now? I'm always writing a little bit in a rush, with my coat just taken off. I'm sort of trying to get things done. And so, yeah, I think it's a good way to work, ironically.
So if you look at being a pianist, we're talking about all of this repertoire. That's already more than enough for a lifetime, as the saying goes. But you also have the other capacities of art forms: composition, writing, poetry, and many of these entered into your life at an early stage. Did you feel like these were all part of your identity, or did it perhaps feel like you needed more outlets for self-expression?
Writing words and writing music was there from the very beginning of my creative life. I always enjoyed English in school the most of all subjects, probably more than music, actually, in school. I always composed from the very beginning of being able to read music. I was writing music as well. Absolute rubbish, but still, I loved writing notes on the page. And I did that a lot when I was young. I suppose, yeah, I've never self-consciously thought I should try and do lots of things, or I should try and be a rounded musician or creative artist. I've just wanted to, and they come out of a kind of inner necessity, which I suppressed for many years, because once I started playing concerts, well, it was a combination of things, really. I left Juilliard. I won the Namberg when I was 21, and I was not expecting it at all, and I suddenly had a diary of concerts, and this went on, and there wasn't time. And then I kind of lost confidence. I would never in those years have played my own compositions on a program. I wasn't connected to what I was writing in that sort of way. So what I did do was to write transcriptions to use as encores. And I did Richard Rodgers, and I did songs and so on. And those were always fun. And it was right here in New York, after a concert at Alice Tully Hall. John Corigliano was in the audience, and I played the Carousel Waltz arrangement that I'd made, and he was very nice about it, and he said, why don't you write your own music, And I said, well, I used to, and he said, well, start again. He said, the only difference is you'd be using your own melodies rather than Richard Rodgers. And it sort of struck, and it stuck at the back of my mind, and I thought, well, yeah, I must do that again, because I loved it so much. And I gradually started. I wrote a piece when one of my composition teachers died at a memorial concert. I wrote a piece for him. And then someone heard that and asked me to write a piece for him. And then I wrote a carol, which I sent to a friend of mine at Westminster Cathedral. And they did the carol in their service. And then they said, well, would you write us a mass? And then that was heard by the Westminster Abbey. And so it kind of... This was all in the mid-2000s, so about 2005, 6. And then really since then to 20 years later, it's been an ongoing thing. And I've written I thought I would never be able to write a serious solo piano piece like a sonata. And then Wigmore Hall and Musica Viva in Australia asked if I would write something. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write a sonata. So I did. And that was number 1, and now there are 4, and there's two sonatinas now. And so it's all kind of snowballed in a way. So I think it's been fun to let this process slightly unravel. I've always had the solid, financial, frankly, world of playing concerts, and I still adore playing. I was just playing the 3rd Concerto of Beethoven 2 nights ago, and I thought, what better thing can there be in the world than to walk onto the stage and play this piece written 200 years ago, that it just expresses the human spirit in such an incredible way. I mean, there's no equivalent to that. So it's an extraordinary privilege to be able to do that as my living. But I love the fact that I can feed into that and have these sort of branches going off into different areas.
Is there also a different type of consideration maybe stage fright in terms of a compositional process. You're wondering how will this go over with the audience?
When you're playing someone else's music, people can dislike what you do with it, but somehow Beethoven exists still, and it's always, you can always say, well, it's a matter of opinion. You know, I take a little bit more time here, or I do this articulation there, and we can debate it. If it's your own piece and people say, well, that was a load of rubbish, or I think that was derivative, or I hated it, it's like they're saying that about you, and so that was difficult. 20 years later, I feel less, I think, well, okay, if you don't like it, fine. I've tried with every piece to write something. Which composer said recently, I think it was on Instagram, write the music you'd like to hear. Don't write what you think people want or what they will like. Write what you like. And it may seem very obvious to a non-musician, but I think a lot of musicians do tear themselves up trying to think about what people think. The same could be said about playing, couldn't it? You know, play that Chopin ballade the way you want to play it. I mean, respect the score, of course, and study everything. But in the end, when you're on the stage, especially if you're beyond the competition stage, just play as you want, because that's you, it's authentic, and that's the best you will be able to bring to that evening.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about poetry. And there's an example that I wanted to look at because there was an early poem that you wrote. And what struck me is that even in this early example, you recognized yourself. If I could just have, perhaps, you just read these lines here, and maybe we can talk a little bit briefly about what you meant in terms of yourself.
Well, yeah, I was 8 years old when I wrote this, so it won some local prize. I mean, this is it was local even within Cheshire, which is local within, you know. So it's a tiny little thing, but I came across it when I was going through some old papers. So it's called Colors of Springtime. Green for the leaves that grow on trees, blue for the clear blue sky. Yellow are the sunshine rays, white for the clouds floating by. Grey for the rabbit that lives in a burrow, brown for her big round eyes. Red for the fox that waits on prey on my beautiful springtime day. So when I read this again, I mean, it's juvenilia, but I did recognize myself in there because I thought especially the last two lines where suddenly the whole structure changes. You know, you've had this very clear rhyming structure, and then suddenly it's like the fox is running away with the words.
This comes from your recent memoirs. In this series of recollections of the early part of your life, you go through some intensely personal episodes. Is it easier to talk about that in written form than, say, conversationally in a more public way? I mean, this, obviously it's published, it's as public as possible, but was that a difficult thing to do?
In some ways. I mean, there's an outrageous side to me which doesn't always seem there, and it was certainly there at school. There is a very shocking early chapter, I think, in the book, which I did think, I can't put this in. And then my outrageous side won the argument, and I did put it in. But a number of people have commented on this with a certain kind of, because it's a bit like the last line of the poem, or, you know, it's sort of, gosh. But the novel had a lot more of that in it, The Final Retreat. That whole novel is extremely explicit and shocking. But that was a device that I wanted to try and create what it was like for this priest to be self-loathing. And so I found the only way I could do that was to shock the reader somehow with the juxtaposition of his spiritual thoughts with the most explicit sexual references, really. But it's easier over dinner to talk about it. It's less easy with cameras. At least with this, I can close the book and walk away.
Does that feeling relate at all to the feeling we have on stage? I wanted to refer to just one line that you had here. Playing in front of an audience is not terrifying just because of the psychological or mental demands. A greater challenge can be this revealing of ourselves to strangers, this inviting the public into our purple bedrooms. There are times when we just want to lock the door from inside and hide away. unless we're writing a memoir.
I think this is something maybe that we don't always understand, that actually just throwing your emotions out isn't always the best way to create the emotions in other people. And sometimes a kind of repression is a bit like cooking, isn't it? If I ever did cook, with the pressure cooker, you know, the lid on the pan actually creates more heat than just having a big flame and the water boiling away to nothing. So I think this is something I still feel in front of the public, and I like sometimes to play with the boundaries with a very emotional piece. I mean, all of the serious music that I've written, I think all of it, I've actually had tears in my eyes at moments during writing it, because I want to express emotions in my music. I don't just want it to appeal, if it does, to the head. So all of the songs, for sure, I mean, especially when I'm choosing texts that are very, very dark and deep, I want the music, I want the audience to have tears in their eyes. That's the music that appeals to me still. And now I'm old enough not to have to pretend, you know, and I find certain things very, very touching. A little French chanson of Charles Trenet, I can listen to that and I get tears in my eyes, and I don't see that there's any less validity in that than there is in a Beethoven string quartet. We can have both.
Stephen, who was Douglas Steele?
Well, Douglas Steele was, I think, a genius. I would have to say that, and I don't use that word lightly. I think it's used far too much. He had been, as a young man, an assistant to Bruno Walter and to Thomas Beecham as a conducting assistant. And then came the war, and as with so many lives, not just people who died, but people whose whole lives were upended by this, and afterwards, you know, had shell shock, or everything was destroyed, opportunities. So he wasn't actually out fighting, but he was one of the, was controlling radio communications and so on, and made a wrong call and had a nervous breakdown and never recovered. I think he was also gay. I'm absolutely sure he was, and never quite came to terms with that either. And so he ended up teaching in a school in Manchester, and playing organ at a church in Manchester too, and teaching, you know, kids like me at Cheetham School as well, so also in Manchester. And he was a depressive. He would have he'd be off for a while and be hospitalized, but he was the most wonderful pianist as far as the sounds he could create at the piano. The most wonderful man. I was at his house many times, and he would play things through for me, and I miss him very much. I went to see him when he was in a nursing home, finally at the end of his life, and he was one of many, many unsung people in the music world. I would include orchestrators, arrangers in Hollywood, people who never get acknowledged, but who are towering geniuses. And without them, we would have no Beatles. We'd have no, great artists who are the frontliners.
You describe some of the early pianists that you admired through a particular album that you found. I believe it was Keyboard Giants of the Past. And you mentioned, among others, Cortot.
Yeah.
What was the resonance there for you?
Well, this came to me so early that I can't even sort of pick it apart in a way, because this record, Keyboard Giants of the Past, was a wonderful compilation of about 12 different pianists with one track each. Rachmaninoff and Pachman and Paderewski and Samarov and Gabrilowitsch and Cortot. And so these names I knew before I knew Richter, Gilels, Ashker, all these other sort of gods of the keyboard. I knew the earlier generation before that. So I grew up with that as what the piano sounded like, really. And then I did hear many artists, and of course admire all kinds of styles. I think I don't want to be stuck in one area. But I've never found a performance of the Chopin Preludes as convincing as Cortot's 1933, which I also got when I was very young. It's not the only way to play the pieces, but nothing has moved me more, nothing has charmed me more. I just think, if you listen to the E minor, the fourth prelude with Cortot, you feel like you've heard a whole opera in the space of those 50 seconds or whatever that piece is. And there are many people who play it wonderfully, but I don't know why really that has stuck in my mind. Maybe it was the early impressions I had that just became part of my bones, or maybe he really was greater than the others. Certainly, there are so many other wonderful recordings of Schumann, César Franck, and all the Chopin recordings.
I frequently hear colleagues say that, oh, this pianist is a throwback to a previous era, as though that were necessarily always the best thing. And if that's what we're aspiring to, these great grand old masters, is it really possible to go back and try to sound like them and to phrase like them?
Not self-consciously, no. I think what you should do is to absorb what they play in the style that they play, learn from it, but then be yourself. So I think, because they all are different, I think even just intellectually it's important research to listen to artists from an early generation. But we should also remember that teachers, the best students of teachers don't do what the teachers say. So when someone says, "Oh, I'm a great grand student of whomever," it is really meaningless. Even I remember at Juilliard, when I first went there, I went to study with Martin Cannon because I'd seen in the biography that he was Rosina Levine's assistant, and I thought, wow, Rosina Levine, she was the. Well, I got to, and I mentioned this. He said, "Oh, I didn't like her teaching at all," and in fact, in a way, I think he turned his back on almost everything she said. So I was not getting the assistant to Rosina Levine. I was getting something very different. So this is something worth remembering. I think also the greatest teachers, all their students sound different. And that's good, because a teacher should be developing the personality of the person who's there, not wanting cookie cutter models or whatever it is of yourself. I mean, the idea that someone would hear a student and say, "Oh yeah, he studied with Stephen Howe." I mean, I would not be flattered by that at all, because I'd say, no, I want that person to sound like themselves.
Was there a point in your life where you recognized that you were speaking as yourself?
Everything that we express with honesty is coming from ourselves. I think that the best example, perhaps, is Beethoven, isn't it? Because he begins with Mozart and Haydn there, and obviously the earlier Beethoven sounds, some of it, like Mozart and Haydn. So I think this is something that we should embrace and not be worried about it. I think one of the problems for the last 100 years is this curse of needing not just to be original, but to try to be original. You can't try to be original. You are or you aren't. And I think all the great artists have proved this in a way. I don't think Beethoven was trying to be different from Haydn. He just was, because he was Beethoven. And that's true with all, whether it's Debussy, beginning with a kind of Chabrier, the sweet, centered kind of late romantic French style, and then he discovers new harmonic colors, and then before you know it, he's a new flower in a new pot.
We're aiming for a very high level, but a lot of audiences won't get the difference between an average performance and a truly high level one. Is that ever a point of discouragement for you? Do you think that the aim then is also for ourselves?
You come off stage and you think, I could really have done those pages better. Why did I rush? Why did I not take more time over that crescendo, or all of these? Or I could have had more freedom or less freedom. So that's there all the time. But that's human. There's no perfect human being, thank goodness. And so I think we live with our imperfections. And sometimes I've been playing in a way that I didn't want, and I've tried to think of it in a positive way. I've tried to think, well, yeah, I'm not perfect. I'm flawed. Maybe I could have done this better 10 years ago. Or what's going on? I don't like the piano or the whole acoustics, or I don't feel very well. But there's a sort of embrace of that as just being part of humanity. That we're all in this together. We're all on this planet, trying to make the best we can. We tend to want to separate things into good and bad and this and that. And, and I think, and it's true now because opinions are flying over the internet all the time, and social media, and there's, things are true and things are false, and we don't know what's what. But we're all trying our best. I think we have to have compassion and tolerance for people that we don't agree with. And that's one of the things that I find most wonderful about classical music, is that I can walk out onto the stage and play for an audience, and there'll be people in that audience that I disagree with profoundly about things, whether it's politics or anything else. But for that moment, I don't want to make that judgment. For that moment, all of us are in this together. We have this wonderful way of, when politicians can't talk anymore, when musicians can go in, and I really believe we can create good karma, good connections between people, and bring joy and in a very light-handed way. Someone came backstage I wasn't in Cleveland, it was last week, and she was sort of in tears. It was a recital that I'd done, and she said that her son had died, and that music was the only thing that kept her going. And, thank you so much. And I felt like thanking her, because I felt, well, so often we're obsessing with what you were saying about this passage isn't very good, or that trill wasn't even, but actually this is the sort of thing that really matters. And I thought, well, that's really has made this evening mean something to me in a way that I can't imagine it being more meaningful.
Stephen, how do we deal with times in our life where we might feel some self-doubts, some discouragements, setbacks?
It's very difficult to have a career as a musician, and I think in some ways we should be discouraging people doing it unless they absolutely passionately want to. Colin Davis said this, the conductor, about his children. He said, I forbade them to go into music because I knew if they did, then they would really want to do it, and you need that kind of determination in order to have any chance at a success. Maybe that's already a comfort, to know that every artist who's worth anything in history has had self-doubt. It's where you take it, I suppose. Do you allow it to destroy you, or do you just begin each day trying to look beyond yourself to the music you're playing or the music you're writing? Easier said than done, of course. We need a supportive circle of friends, colleagues. That's something that maybe we don't do that enough, really. But there are certain harsh realities that, if 1,000 wonderful young pianists graduate from school each year across the world, there just isn't the room for everyone to have the sort of career that they may see on YouTube and think, I'd like that. It just isn't possible. And it's cruel. And, there are many cruel things in life that we just don't know the answer to.
Were there moments in your life where you either felt like you wanted to turn your back on the instrument or at least take an extended break?
Yeah, well, a couple of times I thought of becoming a priest. In fact, I was accepted for Juilliard, and I thought, no, I don't want to go. I want to stop playing now. I think I should. So I wrote to the Franciscans, and I said, I'd just converted to Catholicism at that point. I said, I'd like to become I was 19 or 18. And the very wise man wrote back, and he said, well, that's very nice. He said, but I think you should go to Juilliard for 2 years. And if you still feel the same after 2 years in New York, then talk to me again, which is very wise. And I didn't feel the same after 2 years. But then a little further down the line, I had a more serious thought about this. I think people talk about your talent and not wasting your talent a lot. And it can be said in a way that's helpful and also in a way that's actually a burden. Because sometimes people just don't really want a concert career. There are many people who simply don't want to have the life of a concert artist. And that's fine. Don't feel guilty about it or feel that it's any less, because it isn't. We're all in this together. Every career in the big picture is short. I mean, life is just over like that. So it's important that we fulfill ourselves in that short time that we have. And I don't like to say that we're happy. That sounds rather glib. But that we feel that we've done with our lives what we really want to do, what we feel, and done things for other people in a way that makes our time ourselves fulfilling.
Stephen, I wanted to conclude by talking about how we reach for the sublime in our lives. You talked about an experience of hearing the recordings of Erwin Nyíregyházy. And I'm going to read just one sentence. You said, "That day I felt I'd found the very source of the composer's soul, its profound spiritual rapture, its tugging, sagging melancholy." How do we embody a world that reaches for that, and would we know when we've reached that point.
I think that was referring to that Liszt recording that I heard as a student that really blew me away because I'd never heard anything like this. I don't think he was searching for that particularly, or indeed, let's go back a stage to Liszt himself. It was just there. It was a bit like Elgar said, there are melodies, it's easy to write a beautiful melody. They're in the air, or you just take them off the tree like an apple, or we just pluck them out of the air. We have to allow that non-self-consciousness room, I think. And of course, we're encouraged to be, if we're practicing, we're obsessing about what we're doing all the time. But when it comes to the concert, I think just let go. Gosh, I mean, I wish I could take this advice myself, but it's a constant learning process. We'll never get there, but it's the process of it's the journey, as someone put it, isn't it? That, it's not the destination, it's the journey.
Well, Stephen, I hope it's not another 12 years before we check back in with you. But in the meantime, I'm wishing you much joy and continued creativity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel.
It's
Thank
great
you.
to see you. Great to
too,
see you.
Yeah.